Chapter 2 The Road to Bridewell. I was 12 years old, short for my age, with skinny arms and knobby knees. My father often joked that he could run my forearm through his wedding ring. Sadly, this was only a slight exaggeration. I had sandy-colored hair, which I kept in a braid nearly all the time. A few hours before Wardvold's death, I was traveling with my father from our hometown of Lathbury to Bridewell. Being a girl of 12 and lacking adventure, our annual trip there was the most anticipated time of the year for me. It had been a quiet day on the road, though hot beyond belief for so early in the summer. In Bridewell, there was a building that at one time had been a prison. A work camp, really, where the vagrants and convicts from our towns used to be kept. During the day, the prisoners would go outside the wall, doing the hard labor their sentences required. When I say wall, I do not mean the prison wall, although that wall did exist. The wall I am speaking of is the one that surrounded all of Bridewell, which encircled not only the village and the old prison, but stretched out along each side of the roads, lending to the three cities, side of the roads leading to each of the three cities of Lathbury, Turlock, and Lunenburg. Our kingdom was a wagon wheel made of stone. Bridewell sat at its hub, with the other three towns on the end of the three spokes. On the afternoon before Wardvold's death, we were traveling on the Lathbury spoke on our way to Bridewell. The walls loomed over us on both sides of the road, holding in the heat like a long, skinny oven. I was hot and bored. Father? Yes, Alexa? Tell me the story of when they built the walls. Haven't you grown tired of that old legend yet? Of course, I knew very well he enjoyed telling it. My father had a great love of storytelling, and this was one of his favorites. I didn't have to wait long for him to begin. Thomas Wardvold was an orphan. On the day of his 13th birthday, he wandered off from his hometown, all of his belongings stored in a single knapsack. For years no one knew or cared where he'd gone. A seemingly worthless child with no parents and no future to speak of, it's doubtful anyone even noticed he had departed. But he was a spirited boy, smart and full of adventure. Much later, after he became famous, there were those who speculated he was an aimless wanderer for 20 years or more, gathering treasures from far-off places in the land of Elion. Others suggested he lived in the wilds of the enchanted forests and mountains beyond these very walls. In any case, it would seem that he grew to be a forceful leader, for eventually he persuaded others to join him in a place most everyone believed was haunted, dark, and dangerous. The sound of horse claps echoed off the towering walls as we advanced on Bridewell, and my father paused to scratch the golden stubble on his chin. He was a big man with red hair, long and twisted and tangled. In the winter he wore a beard, but the summer proved too much for him, and he took solace in the cool relief of a shaven face. As Wardvold began to thrive and prosper, War became convinced that the area was indeed safe to live in, and so they came. The valley where Wardvold first settled, which is now called Lunenburg, eventually filled up to capacity and provided no room for growth. High mountains rose on either side. On one end of the tight valley was the already established town of Ainsworth. On the other lay the uncharted dangers and scary legends of the wilderness. When yet more families moved into the town, Wardvold decided it was time to expand. The north held giant mountains, the east a thick forest. The west was covered in what became to be known as the Dark Hills. The people of Lunenburg were afraid to venture out past the valley and into the wild. It was then that Thomas Wardvold had a most wonderful idea. My father stopped talking as a cart passed ours, kicking up dust with its two horses. Dear me, so sorry, Mr. Daly, I didn't realize. The driver stammered as he went by. He was upset about carelessly overtaking the mayor of Lathbury and his daughter. His carriage was almost past ours when my father whipped our 2 horses and yelled out, "Yah, yah!" We quickly came neck and neck with the other cart, leaving about 3 feet between us and 3 feet at either side of the wall. My father gave the rival driver a wicked look and proclaimed, "I've not lost a race on the road to Bridewell in 5 years." I was almost thrown from my seat by the thrust of the powerful horses as the race plunged into action. Our opponent, frothing with excitement at racing someone as important as my father, stayed with us for quite a long time. Dust filled the air, and the furious sound of hooves and wheels churned down the road. The walls flew alongside us, stretching into the sky for what seemed like miles. In reality, they were 42 feet tall and made of 3-foot square stone blocks. I thought about the wall extending all the way to Lathbury and to Turlock, which were butted up and walled in against the lonely sea, where fierce mist-covered waves break against the soaring cliffs. The river Roland also ran through our land, so named for the only man known to have crossed it, a man whom no one had seen or heard from since. The river was a wide and powerful mass of fast-moving water, fed by mountains and yet uncharted lands. Lost in my thoughts, I had taken my attention away from the race. When my father pulled hard on the reins to slow the horses, my slight frame nearly flew forward off the cart. "What a pleasant diversion," my father proclaimed as the challenger trotted his horse up beside us, covered from head to toe in a thick coat of dirt. "A shame about the dust." "Quite all right, sir, quite all right. My horses are not what they used to be, but they gave it all they had," the man said. He was doing his best to shake himself off while we continued down the road. "What brings you to Bridewell on this wretchedly hot day?" my father questioned. "Actually, I'm off to Turlock, delivering the weekly mail from Lathbury." "Have you a name?" "Silas Hardy, at your service." He had finished dusting himself off and smiled back at us with bright white teeth against a darkly tanned face. "Well, Silas, how about you escort us the rest of the way to Bridewell? I wouldn't want to leave you behind with those unreliable animals dragging you into town. Besides, I'm just telling my daughter about the wall and how it was built. An enjoyable story, as you might as well sit in on." Silas looked up at the walls on both sides and the hot sun above, beads of sweat running down his temples. "I've heard it many times, sir, but I'm hot and bored, and my horses are too tired to outrun you. Let's hear it again." He wiped the sweat from his temple and rested his elbows on his knees, holding the reins loosely in his large, meaty hands. Father resumed the story. "As I was saying before our new friend Silas joined us, Warvold had a problem. More people were immigrating to Lunenburg, pioneers, miners, merchants, and families. Many came to the valley looking for a better life, and the poor little town quickly became overcrowded. Then one day Warvold had an idea, a tremendous idea. He would build a walled road out into the unknown, and at the end of it he would build a new town. As long as the wall was in front of the people, the enchanted dangers that lurked about could be kept away." And then with a comical dark look, Father added, "Only who would build the wall? Surely the people of Lunenburg were too afraid to stand outside or near the edge, which is what would be required to build such a thing. No, Warvold needed other people to do the work, and so he met with the leaders of Ainsworth, the large city from which he had originated. Ainsworth had a prison that was overcrowded with the most terrible brutes and thieves in the city. In that place, if you were a convicted man, you were brought before 2 justices, branded with a C for criminal, and sent to the prison to perform hard labor. A red-tailed hawk flew low overhead, and another sat upon the top of a crusted wall to my right. This was a common sight, as hawks were always about the walls, and more appeared as we drew nearer to the city gate. Warvold made a deal with the leaders of Ainsworth, my father continued. He was building a prison in Lunenburg, had been for some time, and he was willing to take 300 of the foulest criminals Ainsworth had to offer. There was but one condition. After 10 years, Warvold could return the convicts to Ainsworth, no questions asked. The leaders of Ainsworth thought this was a wonderful idea. Their own prison held only 400 men and was full to capacity. Giving the convicts to Warvold allowed them time to plan a new, larger prison, and besides, hard labor had been part of every convict sentence. The deal was done, and within a year, the Lunenburg prison was complete, and the convicts delivered as promised. Warvold was not one to take chances, so he devised a plan of his own to make sure the convicts never escaped unnoticed. The branded C on every convict was always easy to see, making clear to everyone in Lunenburg who was a criminal and who was not. The rest is as I've told you 100 times, Alexa, said my father. Warvold put the criminals to work, and in 3 years they built the wall to what is now Bridewell. By that time, more people flooded into the valley. When the walled road was completed, Lunenburg popped like a cork from a bottle of sour wine. People streamed out of it to settle Bridewell, and many even helped build the 2 miles of wall that now surrounded the city. As quickly as the wall around Bridewell was complete, 2 more walled roads were started by the convicts under Warvold's lead. Over the next several years, the walled roads to Turlock and Lathbury were finished, thus completing our kingdom. Warvold brought the convicts back to Ainsworth as he promised. Many years ago, he returned all except a handful that had died of disease or injury. With that, my father was finished, and we were at the gate to Bridewell.